Study Section 11. John Milton and English Neoclassical Tradition. Introduction. In this study section, we will discuss English Neoclassical Tradition in a bid to expound our prior knowledge of the contribution of John Milton to English poetry. Basically, through the course, the students would be prepared to understand the difference. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this section, you should be able to differentiate between neoclassical tradition and other traditions in English poetry. Discuss the contribution of John Milton to neoclassical. The nature of neoclassical tradition. Neoclassical tradition evolved in 17th and 18th centuries. Under the classical tradition, there were really no principles that could be referred to as neoclassical in the real sense, but there were writers who emulated the classical writers, such as Horace and Homer. Their literature was influenced by Aristotle's poetics. It was a kind of literature that matched content with style and combined pleasure with instruction. According to Osby, 1992, 661, by the middle of the 18th century, poetry written by recipe and formulaic regulations had become stale and at one. The later decades of the 18th century moved away from general body of inherited classical principles towards the poetics, which is labeled Romanticism. The poets and poems in this traditional included Alexandra Pope's Rape of the Lock, Samuel Johnson's Vanity, and John Milton's Lycidas and Paradise Lost. Contributions of John Milton to neoclassical tradition. John Milton criticized the metaphysical tradition in both subject and style. Lycidas is one of his poems. His position is that poetry should not express the poet's fear, hope, joy, ideas, or ego. Rather, it should express high moral principles, ethical objectives, and moral intentions. He describes a poet as a seer and a voice of social consciousness. So, according to him, poetry should not be concerned with love affairs or other private themes, but rather public issues that can be beneficial to all. As a poet, Milton distinguished himself in his use of lyrical mode and poetic grammar. He used classical mythology and highly elevated language. He did not imitate classical poets as Dryden Pope and Johnson did. He created a poetic idiom which was quite different from everyday language. After Milton's death, there was a decline in poetry. Charles I was executed. In 1660, Charles II was installed, and the English society settled again, and there was peace. This validated the growth of arts and poetry. Poetry witnessed a rebirth. There was simplicity, clarity, restraint, good sense, and positive behavior in art and life. The poet had a good sense of social responsibility. This gave rise to the use of satire and burlesque in poetry. The role of literature, which is to teach and entertain, also became distinct. They attacked the use of metaphysical wit. They favored the invention of new poetic techniques and forms. They used heroic couplets and measured poetry, i.e., written in verse. Neoclassical poets regarded nature as a concept and superior reality, not as plants or vegetation, but a human nature or norms that determine social behavior that were acceptable to society. Pope is a moral poet and social critic. He regarded poetry as an initiative act, and so he imitated what he considered to be the best in the great authors of the past. For example, he translated Iliad by Homer and Virgil's epic. He imitated great poets and started the tradition of mock heroic poetry in Rape of the Lock. A trivial event is elevated to epic proportion in order to produce a mock epic. John Milton, 1608 to 1674, was born by wealthy parents. His rich background facilitated his education and enabled him pursue a private program of study in adulthood. In 1642, he married Mary Powell, who returned to her family after 6 weeks. They reconciled in 1645 and had 4 children. His wife and son died in 1652. He became blind in 1653. He remarried in 1656 to Catherine Woodcock, who gave birth to a daughter named Catherine after her mother. Both mother and daughter died on the same day in 1656. He wrote some sonnets on his personal experiences, such as his blindness and the death of his wife. He wrote political pamphlets. All these were burnt after the Restoration. He completed Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Something Agonist. His poem on his blindness is referred to as When I Consider How My Light is Spent, or On His Blindness. John Milton portrays man's inability to serve his maker in the midst of problems. He skillfully translates his private problem into public themes. The poem is a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet with an octave and a septet, with a rhyme scheme ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE. It is rich in biblical allusion, e.g., line 3, metaphor lines 3 to 4, rhetorical question line 7, alliteration in line 18, archaic language among other devices. His poetry gained prominence shortly before he died. His style was considered to be a model for the sublime mode in the 18th century English poetry. Study section summary. In this study section, we presented neoclassical poetry as a reaction against metaphysical poetry and an imitation of classical tradition. We also discussed John Milton's position that poetry should not be an expression of personal feelings, but a presentation of high moral principles, ethical objectives, and moral intentions. Although John Milton discusses his personal problems in poetry, he translates them into themes with important social significance. End of study section 11. Thanks for listening.